So in this last session of the ethnography, we are going to talk about the moral stance of the university leadership. I believe that through their actions in this process, they have shown moral principles that then guide also different actors further down in the process. And despite claiming to be fair, democratic, and collegial, I believe that they are an example of dishonesty and deceit and autocratic practices at the expense of the well-being of the students and the truth also. I think there is a link, there is a lineage, a moral lineage, which connects the leadership to the actions that took place within the School of Architecture, and that connects that ideology of relativism imposed onto all theses in the school and the use of identity politics and the morale of the victims to legitimize the suspension of academic freedom and free speech, actually. The Princeton leadership, I think, has repeatedly indulged in conflict of interest, neglect of the duties, breach of the university policy, and I think slander. And this session is aimed to evidence these actions perpetrated in the name of the students, which we will see have a different opinion. Let me now move on to the slides that I will use as evidence of these processes. So I believe that the reason why the president and the dean of faculty wanted me to be dismissed from the faculty is not that I did not comply or wanted not to comply with my duties as a thesis advisor, or that I mistreated students in any way. I think that if we look at the evidence that I presented through the previous sessions, those allegations are false. The real reason why they dismissed me is that I defended my academic freedom and independence and that of my students, and dared to denounce publicly the corrupt practices of the thesis advice in the School of Architecture. And in doing so I defied and disrupted the strategies, whether administrative or academic, that the school authorities deployed to silence me and to cover themselves. In other words, I was dismissed because I exercised my rights and I dared speaking truth to power. Ultimately, what is at stake here is academic freedom to teach and to learn and free speech. The practices for thesis advising at the School of Architecture were in breach of these principles, these important principles of academic practice, by imposing that ideology of conversationalism or relativism over all the theses in the school. An ideology which is, I think, ultimately connected to certain interests in the university leadership. That's why I believe there is a moral genealogy between the imposition of such ideologies and certain areas of interest, and that's what I would like to explain in this session. As you can see in the university principles of general conduct and regulation, first point, the free inquiry and the free expression feature importantly, and then immediately goes to talk about the disciplinary system, which is actually used through this process against those freedoms in order to suppress my public dissent. For example, my letters to the students advising them to choose an alternative advisor until this systematic conflict of interest is resolved, which I understand is now resolved, because immediately after I was dismissed, the thesis courses were discontinued. So it is actually interesting to mention this, but so the disciplinary system was used to silence me, to enforce opaqueness, and by deliberately withholding or manipulating evidence, and by failing to comply also with due process. As you can see there, a defendant of a complaint has the right to see the complaint and defend himself or herself against these complaints. And that is something that, as we will see, was not complied with. So the disciplinary system, in that sense, has breached its own rules by failing to process two outstanding complaints, one from me against Dean Ponce de Leon, and then the disciplinary committee and the dean of the faculty and the CCFA, and another one which was allegedly submitted by Dean Ponce de Leon against me for some sort of harassment, which I haven't been able to see. So that those two complaints were put on hold for over a year, while the investigation, fake investigation, proceeded and ended up with my dismissal from the faculty. So that's we're gonna be looking mostly at the people at the top here. So the president, the dean of the faculty, the ad hoc committee of the board of trustees, and the CCFA, which played an important role at the end of the process. And as you can see, much of what we will see in this session relates to these two outstanding complaints. This one from me against, which I submitted to the president, and another one from Dean Ponce de Leon to the dean of the faculty against me. So these are the main actors. I think that in their actions you can see their moral stance. President Gruber ignored a legitimate complaint filed with him precisely because the dean of the faculty and the deputy dean of the faculty were already defendants in the claim. And he argued that he had neither responsibility nor jurisdiction to deal with the matter. And he passed my complaint to Dean Kulkarni, who was one of the defendants of the complaint. And Dean Kulkarni accepted that complaint, allegedly, in his own words, started proceeding with it. So accepted to adjudicate a complaint that was in which he was a defendant in a clear breach of a clear conflict of interest, and then failed to proceed the complaint from Mónica Ponce de León against me, which was filed during the investigation process and which I have not even seen, despite the fact that I have requested multiple times for me to be able to see and to defend myself from the allegations from the dean. not only the recommendations of both Dean Kulkarni and President Gruber are unsafe in the absence of a conclusion regarding my complaint and Monica Ponce de Leon's complaint, but their behavior does not demonstrate much moral integrity and honorability. Dean Kulkarni appears to willingly accept to investigate and adjudicate claims against himself and has failed to honor his promises about these investigations, promises made in writing that we will see. And President Gruber is neglecting his duty to investigate a complaint of a legitimate member of the faculty, delaying the process until I was dismissed. So he didn't have to address these complaints, which I believe are rather serious. And not only that, he forwarded these allegations to one of the defendants, as I have explained. In most democratic judicial structure, I think this would be considered a clear case of corruption of process. But it's not only the president of the faculty, it's also the board of trustees, which signed my dismissal. So ultimately, the board of trustees, which we see in this picture, are legally responsible for the decision, and so these are the members of the board that endorse the recommendations of the president, and we will talk about them later on, because I think it is very important to understand their background and to ultimately see who is behind perhaps this postmodern relativism, the constant appeal to interpretation and the postmodern conversation, and what interests does this ideology represents. The processes that I will describe in this session are collected in section D, specifically in pages 39, 40, and 41, and they refer mostly to the disciplinary process, but they are also on chapter F, on Dean Kulkarni's failure to proceed, the complaint from Dean Ponce de Leon, and in chapter H, and all the corresponding appendixes to these chapters, where I detail President Gruber's failure to investigate my complaints against Monica Ponce de Leon, the dean of the faculty, and the CCFA, and the deviation of this complaint down to the dean of the faculty. Let me start on July 6, 2020, when I filed some 400-page complaint with the Office of the President against Dean Ponce de Leon, and also as co-defendants, the Dean of the Faculty, the Disciplinary Committee, and the CCFA. I had to file it with the President precisely because the default recipient of this complaint would have been Dean of the Faculty, which was co-defendant. 4 days later, I received this letter saying that somebody would be in touch, but nobody was in touch. And a month later, in the absence of any news, I mentioned this to Dean Kulkarni in correspondence, following the discussion of the investigative report, and basically told him that it was important to consider this complaint before the completion of the disciplinary procedures, because obviously the disciplinary procedures were being questioned seriously in my complaint. I received this note from Dean Kulkarni notifying that my complaint filed with President Gruber would be investigated by him shortly, and that he was also investigating a complaint, which I didn't know at the time, from Dean Ponce de Leon against me. I protested that he was not an appropriate judge for my complaint because he was a defendant on it, and the disciplinary committee was also a defendant. He didn't reply. And then he issued me with the first report of the disciplinary process, which, as we have seen, was a collection of false evidence. And I answered to him, listing the different failures of that report, and told him that I would add my comments on this report as additional evidence of wrongdoing by the dean of the faculty. So I sent my response to President Asguber as an addendum to my complaint from July. Dean Kulkarni answered a few days later stating that the addendum had been forwarded to him also, and that the investigation of Dean Ponce de Leon was underway. He said it was already underway, but I had not seen any material from it, and so I stated that I was looking forward to see the complaint from Dean Ponce de Leon, because I suspect that her claims were primarily grounded on gender stereotypes and other kinds of lies. So I asked Dean Kulkarni to send me her complaint, which I had the right to see as a member of the faculty, as per the rules and regulations of Princeton University. Time went by and I didn't receive anything. I didn't hear anything from the investigation that I had contested. And it turns out that on November 2nd, I was given a supplementary report that apparently Dean Kulkarni had requested from Dean Turano, who was in charge of the investigation. And as I expected, that report was again full of lies. And so I responded, as we have seen already, and I responded to that supplementary report on November 23rd, pointing at its multiple failures, and forwarded again my response as a second addendum to my complaint to the president. The same I had done with my response to the first report. And in December, Dean Kulkarni responded that the second addendum to my complaint had been again passed on to him. And despite the fact that it was primarily about the performance of the disciplinary committee under his watch, and insisted that the Monica Ponce de Leon complaint was being investigated. He says it was being investigated, and I restated my eagerness to see that complaint. But that complaint was never forwarded to me. And I didn't hear anything else from my complaints to President Asguber, which allegedly were underway, in the words from Dean Kulkarni. So obviously the dismissal process was completed without completing any of these processes, and that shows, I mean, whether Dean Kulkarni is able to honor his word and is willing to accept to adjudicate a complaint in which he is a co-defendant. That gives you a certain idea of the moral standards that the administration, the higher administration in the university have, and in what moral genealogy can we place them. Honorability and transparency, I think, are perhaps universal requirements of a justice system. Eventually, Dean Kulkarni finished his recommendation for dismissal, obviously, to the president on January 6th, and as expected, he found me guilty of neglect of duty, violation of rules, impaired performance, and makes a recommendation for dismissal. And I responded to his recommendation, accusations which I believe to be entirely false, and my response is attached on Appendix D1. His recommendation basically refers to his warning letter from December 7th, 2018, which I and his warning, which I believe to be void in the absence of written and approved policy for the thesis, for my thesis duties, which I had repeatedly requested from him and from the coordinators. There is a number of false statements. For example, I never confirmed to students that I was unable to serve in spring 21. I simply told them that I may be dismissed before, because by the time the conversation with the students took place, I had been told by Dean Kulkarni that he was considering dismissal or suspension. And so I simply told the students I may not be able, but I never confirmed that I was not going to be able. I asked, in fact, him to confirm whether I was going to be able to complete my duties with these students that were being assigned to me. And then he mentions some form of harassment in correspondence. And interestingly, the correspondence that he refers to was a correspondence between me and Monica Ponce de Leon, in which I was copying him systematically. And it's interesting that he only took action on that correspondence when Monica Ponce de Leon filed her complaint. So. But anyway, as I said, I haven't been able to see the complaint yet. Then he brings back the plagiarism matter from 2014 to add ammunition to his recommendation, which was subject to a legal process in the courts of law. And that controversy actually started with President Gruber requesting me to step down as Dean of the School of Architecture before doing and completing a proper investigation on the facts. And this then produced another investigation report, which was, by the way, supported by Dean Turano, which, of course, had to find me guilty. Because the president had already taken action, so the disciplinary committee had to find me guilty. And then from that report, Dean Kulkarni extracts statements, such as, for example, that I encourage and require students to plagiarize. I believe that is nothing but slander. And I have explained the facts many times. And in fact, those events may constitute the second part to this ethnography, because the facts were that with the agreement of the Biennale director, Rem Koolhaas, and author of the publication, we decided that the catalog of the exhibition should not have an overtly academic tone, and then I decided that the text accompanying our presentation would not include citations to avoid that kind of academic format. And I believe that was entirely legitimate, because this was a work of public information, not a peer-reviewed publication. And I did inform the students in writing early on in the process that we would not be using citations. Therefore, their texts have to be properly formatted, so that we didn't have to make references. And it happened that in some instances that the texts were not appropriately written, and there were, in fact, some instances of very mild plagiarism. I counted 12 in total, and I mean, there are alternative sources for all of them. So it's in some ways I think it's an incredibly minor problem, which yes, I was responsible, because finally I should have checked that the work of the students was legit, and it wasn't. So it is ultimately my fault that they were published like that. But I believe that anybody who looks at the accusations will see that they are ridiculous, that they are minor technical descriptions that were used from unaccredited sources, but in any way they were what is a serious problem of plagiarism. And so what happened was that one of my assistants, who had been dismissed from the research for being unproductive, accessed illegally our digital archive and used a document he copied from the archive to file a complaint and make claims about my ideas, and then handed them over to the New York Times and the Daily Princetonian, and so on and so forth. So instead of doing a proper investigation of the facts, President Desguber asked me to step down immediately in the middle of the term and ordered an investigation, which was done by Professor Fass and Professor Moir, which elaborated again slanderous report aimed to legitimize the president's decision. Obviously, they had to legitimize the decision that was already made. The answer to that report from Professor Fass and Professor Muir is included in chapter I, and there you can see what happened, and in pages 108, 109, 110, I myself, and this is a document that I published long before, the nature of the plagiarism involved. But anyway, going back to Dean Kulkarni's recommendation, he says that I wrote to the students to ask them to confide me with their choices because Monica Ponce de Leon and I did so, and Monica Ponce de Leon, unlike what he says, was warned in advance that if she did not show me confidentially the choices of the students, I would have to ask the students for it. There is a written evidence of that, so she was withholding evidence, and I had to, and I warned her that I would seek that evidence from the students in writing. And then he goes on to the mistreatment of graduate students, which is, I think, ludicrous and also slanderous. Any of my students, and probably of the students of the School of Architecture, will confirm that this is an entirely false statement. That is, and I'll talk, this is all constructed by Dean Turano's manipulation of interviews and withholding evidence. But we've seen already that. And then he says also that the students couldn't choose me because I set out a protocol for engagement after his failure to provide me with a proper protocol of engagement, which the coordinators were not willing to give me, and a document explaining also my duties approved by the faculty. But the actual fact is that the students could not choose me because he suspended me before the students could choose me. So I was not an option. The students couldn't choose me. It's not that they didn't choose me because I set out a protocol. It's because he suspended me from advising. And finally, he states the real reason for my dismissal, which is ongoing defiant and disruptive behavior, which I admit, and I believe that such behavior, which I think did not breach any rules of the university, is entirely legitimate in the face of the imposition of hostile, dishonest, and deceitful and corrupt behavior by a few members of the School of Architecture with chronologically precede my defiant and disruptive behavior and my public denunciations. I think what I did was to challenge illegitimate authority through the process. And it is quite interesting that a week after signing this recommendation, Sanjeev Kulkarni resigned as dean of the faculty. I don't know to what degree his involvement in this process affected that decision. He has not given a public explanation about why he resigned, but I suspect that there is some relationship, or I want to suspect that he realized that he was not really at the level that he should have been in dealing with the matter. President Gruber took over. I reiterated to him all the failures of the investigation on which Dean Kulkarni's recommendation was grounded, and which I believe could be the origin of a claim of breach of implied covenant of good faith, unfair dealing, as a lawyer would say. So I explained the failures both on the part of the investigation committee and of Monica Ponce de Leon, and I reminded him that my complaint had been sitting on his desk for 9 months at the time. And I also reminded him that it was his duty to address my complaints before issuing a recommendation, and that he did have responsibility as the only authority above the defendants in the claim. And I believe he did have also jurisdiction to act, as he had done, for example, during the affair of the Venice Biennale, when he asked me to step down before completing a proper investigation, already acting as the president of the university. And I also asked him why my complaint had been forwarded to Dean Kulkarni, who was one of the defendants, but he didn't respond to my question. Eventually, on February 25th, he issued his recommendation for dismissal prior to any resolution or completion of my complaints about the investigation, or Monica Ponce de Leon's complaint against me. And interestingly, he did not confirm, he never confirmed that he had passed the matter to Dean Kulkarni, although it is obvious that he did, because there is plenty of correspondence with Dean Kulkarni that confirms that he passed that complaint to him. I mean, Gruber is a lawyer by training, and I think that he understands that passing a complaint to be heard by a defendant is a breach of all legal standards. It doesn't even happen in third world dictatorships. His statement contains many of the false statements from Dean Kulkarni's recommendation, especially because there are no clearly written and approved requirements for thesis advice in the School of Architecture, and I had asked Dean Kulkarni and the coordinators to provide me with those in writing, and none of them was able to do that. Obviously, to put this process in writing would have been admissible evidence of how corrupt the protocols were, and they were obviously never written, and in some instances never voted, for example, in terms of how the credit was given to the thesis advisors. But most importantly, most of his accusations relate to a pattern of mistreating students and the callous disregard for the well-being of students, and a number of problems that I have, that I'm allegedly produced to the students. So he uses the students as the victims that he needs to protect. He makes this very much in the light on behalf of the students almost. What I did then was to maybe I should mention also that he mentions he mentions this mistreatment of students, but he doesn't pay any consideration to the fact that the students were being mistreated, seriously mistreated by the system, by subjecting them to conflicting ideological stances in the course of their thesis year, and this kind of constant interference with the thesis advisors by the coordinators. I believe that the people who have been mistreating the students, having callous disregard for their well-being, are those who assign students based on the political interests of the department, those who deliberately subjected the students to contradictory advice on a systematic level, and those who failed to answer to confirm, for example, that to the students that I would be able to complete my duties. They didn't respond to that, and it was only when I wrote to the dean of the faculty a month after that they confirmed that I would be able to complete my duties, only to reassign the students a few weeks later. That is the real mistreatment of students that was happening in the School of Architecture. And then President Gruber, who I believe has been involved in this dispute since December 2019, as per some correspondence that I was given by the disciplinary committee, seems to believe that this free inquiry and free expression and the freedom to teach and to learn of students, and the proper crediting of academic work and the right to a fair and non-hostile work environment are mundane. That's the word he uses. And that the autocratic and deceitful behavior of Dean Ponce de Leon and the Dean of the Faculty and the Investigation Committee, which he has refused to address, are irrelevant. I think that's a confirmation of his moral stance, and rather cynically he concludes that he considered the suspension of my thesis duties as a solution to the problem, ignoring first that I was teaching thesis in 2020 very successfully until Dean Kulkarni reassigned my students. I think that consideration is entirely cynical. He never, of course, considered to suspend my thesis duties. The real reason, he was simply using the thesis to dismiss me for the reason that not that I refused to teach thesis on mistreated students, but I denounce, defied, and disrupted these illegitimate practices in the School of Architecture, and they're speaking truth to power. So I appealed his recommendation to the CCFA, which we have already seen. These are the 6 members of the CCFA that oversaw my appeal to the president's letter. We have already seen some of them in previous iterations, and that's actually one of the problems. 60% of them, 4 out of 6, had been involved in dismissal of prior appeals I had made to the CCFA. And I believe, following the rules from the American Association of University Professors, they should have recused themselves from this committee, from serving in this committee, because they were already involved in prior processes. They didn't. And You can see that basically the committee was constituted by 4 people who had already been involved and about whom I had already complained. They were part of my complaint, the 2 prior iterations of the CCFA. And as expected, their opinion about the president's recommendations was that it was absolutely fine. They didn't find, as usual, any reason to accept the appeal, despite of everything that we have already seen. And there are a number of things that are important in the verdict. One of them is that they seek refuge again in interpretation. So I have a different interpretation from the rules, and the president obviously has the right one, and they don't want to consider what are these interpretations, but simply they say there are different interpretations. Again, that kind of logic of relativism, postmodern relativism, let's say. And they say also that these 2 outstanding complaints that have been held up for a year at this time may still be investigated. So the fact that they have not been investigated, that doesn't mean that the university is failing its duties, and that the conflict of interest of forwarding from the president forwarding my complaint to the dean of the faculty is moot, because that investigation had not started yet. That is categorically false, and we have seen 3 letters from Dean Kulkarni stating that those 2 complaints had already been started. So the complaints were started, and then they stopped them, and they held them until I was dismissed, so that they didn't have to be investigated, despite the fact that they could be investigated. That's the level of cynicism of these people who are actually representing the faculty of Princeton University as a whole. I don't know whether the faculty would feel themselves represented by these decisions. And of course, they say that they didn't investigate the veracity of my rebuttal about the pattern of mistreating students, of which I am accused, because that was the outcome of a very serious and deep investigation. So that was how these people treated a serious appeal, as usual, and based on that, the president wrote to the board of trustees based on the assessment of this appeal committee, the CCFA, which was, I think, entirely inappropriate, both in terms of the population that constituted it, but also in terms of some of their statements. And so what I did, in the light of the fact that even the CCFA found that the statements from the president were reasonable and fair and so on, I took the statements that President Sykes-Gruber recommendation had made about me regarding a pattern of mistreating, saying that I damaged student well-being and educational interests by refusing to comply with the school policies regarding theses that, as we know, have never been written or voted, and that I engage in harmful communications to students with needlessly and recklessly increase the risk of harm to students, involving them directly in faculty disagreements, as if they were not involved by default because of the protocols that were being used in the school. and that I did not treat students respectfully and showed a callous disregard for student well-being and risked the educational interest and well-being of students in the program. So I took all these statements regarding the students, and I wrote to my former students, to most of, those that I could get hold of. And so I told them to give me a reverse letter of recommendation and to comment on these statements that President Eisgruber was making in his recommendation for dismissal. And I got immediately many letters of reverse letters of recommendation from my students, which I include in chapter J, appropriately redacted. Obviously, the names of the students should not appear, and in fact, they asked me, or many of them asked me, not to release their name because they were concerned about retaliation from the faculty in the school. But it's actually, there are 30-some letters that I selected from the ones I got that I think are actually very interesting to read, and that entirely dismiss the concerns about mistreatment that I have been accused by the dean of the faculty and the president of the university. So I think it's really an interesting collection of statements that anybody who is interested in the process should read. And then I collected all these comments or all these letters from the students and added them to my complaints and my appeal to the CCFA as the material to be given to the ad hoc committee of the Board of Trustees, who are the people that are on the upper row of this page. And this is maybe where I would like to comment about who is finally in power behind the Princeton University is these people and others. I mean, these are the ones that were involved in the ad hoc committee that signed my dismissal unanimously. The people on the row below are other people that I think are interesting as members of this board, which is also the board that cancelled Woodrow Wilson. I mean, you can see Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft. You can see Terry Sewell, Democratic Congress representative for Alabama State. You can see Anthony Yuseloff, who is the executive managing director of Davidson Kempner Capital Management, assets under management, 34 billion. Elizabeth Bruce Myers, global director of investment banking from JP Morgan, assets under management 2.9 trillion. Peter Briggs, co-chief executive officer of Fortress Investment Group, asset under management 49 billion. C. James who is the president and co-chief investment officer of Citadel Investment Group, asset under management 35.5 billion. So you see, and obviously I selected some of them. There are many other people, I think, all incredibly successful and accomplished, who I'm sure that the people I just mentioned never saw any material about this claim, but they are there with their name, and they are legally responsible for my dismissal, which was performed on their behalf, but by the by the ad hoc committee, which is very much the same as the executive committee of the board of trustees, which is constituted by Louis Sams, who is retired executive vice president of Turner Broadcasting Corporation, Philip Samaxiol, chief executive officer of Hellman and Friedman, assets under management 48.9 billion. Heather Gerken, dean of the Yale Law School. I wonder what she thought, if she ever saw the actions from President Gruber and Dean Kulkarni sending the complaints to the defendants and other things that took place through this process. Kim Goodwin, former managing director of and head of equities for Credit Suisse, asset management, assets under management, 1.5 trillion Swiss francs. Laura Forese, executive vice president and chief operating officer of New York Presbyterian, which is a kind of hospital organization, very large hospital organization in the New York area. Kimberly Johnson, executive vice president and chief operating officer of Fannie Mae, assets under management 3.5 trillion. As you know, Fannie Mae was one of the companies involved in the subprime collapse in 2007. And finally, Paul Haga, who is an interesting character, Republican donor. Actually, most of them, I believe, are mostly Democrats, but he's a Republican donor and former chairman of Capital Research and Management Company, which today, I don't know when he was there, but today has 2.35 trillion of assets under management. But he is also former CEO of National Public Radio and the chairperson of the Facebook Oversight Board Trust. Now, if you look at other people in the board, you will see that the investment banking industry is overrepresented. You can hardly find anybody in the industry, in the kind of manufacturing industry or in the agricultural field. So they are a very interesting section of what constitutes the power of the American economy today, I think, which is asset management, financiers, banking, financial operations, basically, some media companies, Turner Broadcasting Corporation, Facebook, and surprisingly not too many technology companies. Brad Smith is there, but actually Brad Smith is a lawyer by training. So it's basically lawyers and financiers that constitute the majority of the current board. And I wonder whether that ideology of liberal relativism, which now is turning into the liberal identity politics that, for example, cancel Woodrow Wilson, is not related to this type of industries that are mainly about law and media and finance, which is the core of the current economic power in the US. And I just thought, how did this board look like in the 1960s? Probably there were industrialists, there were scientists, there were there may have been some people related to the military, because back then the economy was very much based on the kind of techno-corporate military compound. But today is this kind of financial media, law, and this type of industries, I think, thrive on fluctuation and imprecision, and the field. So the arts are also represented in the board. I don't know to what degree, even without being formally involved, there is this choice that is made about a certain ideology that I think now is out of control. This kind of postmodern, relativist, liberal ideology that has given rise to populism and to and to identity politics and some of the problems that we see now in society, particularly in American society, very acutely. So I'm very fascinated by the possibility that there is a relationship between the ultimate power in Princeton University and the ideologies that were being imposed upon all student theses in the School of Architecture. But anyway, the fact is that these people are the people who actually sign my dismissal, and sign my dismissal, and they tell me that I failed to comply with policies and requirements applicable to members of the faculty and damage the educational interests of affected. They qualify affected because they know, they had seen already the list of people who were denying the fact that I mistreated them in any way. So only the affected students, who I don't know how many are there, and it will be interesting to talk to the 3 students the investigation committee interviewed, because I don't think that they would, even they would not feel affected by my mistreatment. But I don't know, will be interesting to see their opinion, and disrupted the operations of the School of Architecture. And I persisted in my misconduct after repeated warnings. Yes, I persisted in defying a system that was corrupt. And so they finally say that they do not intend to issue a proactive statement about this action. However, should you elect to make this matter public, which they know I am going to make public, we will respond to press inquiries and will also correct the record as necessitated by your public representations. So I'm also quite curious about what will happen when they see my publication of this seminar, which basically explains in what way the authority in Princeton is structured and how does it perform and how does it behave, and we, I mean, the ultimate conclusion, which is my dismissal, is something that we have seen before. We have seen how authoritarian regimes and autocrats do with those who dare exposing convenient evidence or defy illegitimate orders and eventually speak truth to power.